Hello, welcome back. This is going to be part 3 of our lecture this week, going into inequality, poverty, and discrimination. This is going to be chapter 19 in your Libra textbook. Okay, so inequality and income redistribution. We're going to talk about all these different things a little separately. They're all related, but they're all slightly different. So income inequality is measuring the difference of income between richest and poorest groups. So if you could do this from a country, a family, a city, whatever. Let's say we have three siblings, and we have the first child makes 200,000, the second child makes 100,000, and the third child in the family would make 50,000. This is income inequality. Now, it could be because they have different skills, different job titles, different experience. There's all sorts of reasons for this. And we're going to look at some ways where we take like the averages, we look over the country total, and we can break it down into different demographics as well. So if these people all were the same age, same area, same education, we may say there's something else going on. We'll get into discrimination a little later. But this would be income inequality. We have people with different levels of income. And when we're talking about this on a country level, we say US has high levels of income inequality. We're talking about the richest groups, the poorest groups. We may even break it into 5 different quintiles, which is just groups of 20%. So top 20%, bottom 20%, middle 20%. Inequality is not poverty. You could be equally poor or unequally rich. So we could have a country where the top earners make $1 million a year and the bottom earners make $200,000 a year. We would say that this has, income inequality, but we would not categorize any of these people as poor, at least not by the standards of when I'm recording this video. Or you could be equally poor. So we could have a country where everybody makes $5,000 a year. And then we have perfect income equality, but everybody's also poor. So poverty is a separate thing from inequality, but both are potentially problems. We're going to look at the Gini coefficient in, I think, the next slide, and we're going to look at the Lorenz curve. And this is a way of measuring inequality around the world. So if you want to look at statistics, you can actually search Gini coefficient by different countries and get a whole bunch of information on where current levels of inequality are. In the United States, we have increasing income equality, where we get this from changes in unemployment, issues with minimum wage, cheaper capital compared to the cost of labor, globalization, and changes in education. And this chart down here is looking at income from the 5 quintiles, so top 20% all the way to the bottom 20%. It also has a little breakout down here for the top 5% of income earners. And this is looking at from 1970 all the way to 2014. And it's looking at decades. This is real income, so it's been adjusted for inflation. When we look at the actual nominal income, it's changed significantly. So we don't want to look at nominal. We want to focus on that real income. And when we look at the bottom group, so the lowest quintile, that's going to be this top row right here, we see in 1970, they were making $10,838 per year. In 1980, $11,791. 1990 to $12,584. 2000, $13,984. So we see some growth, right? We're going from about 11,000 to 14,000. But in 2010, we see this drop down to 11,938. It's dropping again in 2014 to 11,076. So basically, when you look from 1970 to 2014, we have less than $1,000 in real income change for that bottom group. Same thing for the second quintile. Okay, so this is the next chunk, 20% people. We go from 29,000 in the 70s to about 31,000 in 2014. Honestly, not big change in real income. The middle group has a little bit higher, so 47,000 up to 54. And then we start seeing much bigger jumps when we get into those top 2 groups. So 66,000 all the way to 87,000. That's, over $20,000 in real income. Basically, they're taking that income that the lowest group is having and adding two of those to their salary. And then the highest group, highest 20%, went from 117, almost $118,000 in real income up to 194,000 in real income. Huge change. And if we break it down even further to the top 5%, we have 181,000 all the way up to 332,000. So we're seeing really large changes, really large growth in the income of the top earners. And we're seeing really stagnant changes or little growth in that bottom 60%. There are lots of reasons for that. We'll get into some of them here. Unfortunately, we only get to cover this for 1 week. I could talk about this for an entire semester, so definitely go get some more books, look into this, watch videos, do more work, because this is a really interesting topic. Okay, so cheaper capital. This is actually one of the big causes of income inequality in the United States. When we look at who owns capital versus who owns labor, we see that people in the top 20% are much more likely to own both capital and labor, whereas the bottom chunk is only going to be owning their own labor and very little capital. And the thing about capital versus labor is you can own a lot of capital. You are limited to owning your own labor. So if you're talking about working, okay, I can only work 16 hours a day. Okay, we're not going to say 24 because you do have to sleep. If you own capital, let's say I own a machinery, I own, I don't know, a tractor. Maybe that can work 10 hours a day. But guess what? I could buy another tractor. I could buy 2. I could buy 3. I could buy 100. And so as that income goes up, now I have 100 tractors working 10 hours a day. I'm getting paid for 1,000 hours of work per day, right? Rather than just 16. So owning capital gives you the ability to scale or increase or go way beyond what you could earn just with your own labor. But it takes access to money. And oftentimes people in those lower quintiles, there's a very high opportunity cost for money. They want to invest in a tractor. They may lose all of that money. And they need that for food. They need that for rent. They need that to support their daily just existence. And so we see definitely a huge split based on that. When we look at globalization, this is where we're specializing and trading with the world. People are doing what they have their advantages in. And if you're in these higher groups, typically you have more flexibility. You're able to learn new skills, transfer to new jobs, develop new things, and you're not going to be as negatively impacted by globalization. If you're in that bottom chunk, and your country has outsourced all of the customer service jobs and your skill is in being a customer service call center worker, it's going to be really hard for you to find work. And so oftentimes those lower skilled jobs, the cheaper ones, are going to be outsourced. They're going to be produced in a different part of the world. We also see the opportunity cost for education and the gains to education being different depending on what your group you are in. Higher income people have more education, but they also have more incentive to get education because they don't want to drop out of that higher income group. Minimum wages. This is also a little bit linked with education. I think we talked about this in the last video. But lower income groups, when minimum wages go up, they tend to drop out of college or reduce the amount of education they're going to get because now that opportunity cost is too high. If you're going to be making $50,000 or $60,000 a year because you're the manager at Chick-fil-A, you maybe don't need a college degree for that. And if you get a college degree and you're going to be earning still about $60,000 a year, it might not be worth it, right? There's a high opportunity cost. And for people who are planning to be in the higher tiers of income, it increases the incentive for education because now you don't need a degree to get $60,000 a year. So now I need to work harder, learn more, do more, be more productive so I could be making in that top chunk of income. And so we see all of these things are increasing inequality in the United States. And even though the bottom chunk is not getting poorer, they're still staying, as poor as they were over time. It does lead to a lot of unrest and unhappiness. And people are like, hey, how come there's a whole group of people getting richer and wealthier and their lives are getting better? And we're just like stuck. We're staying here and things are not improving. And so it does cause a lot of social issues. And so inequality is something that countries really do want to pay attention to. And when we're talking about these groups, it's not the same people all the time. So it's not the same people in 1970 all the way up to 2014 or 2025 or whatever years you're looking at. It's just looking at the lowest group of income earners over time. And in the US, we do have income mobility, social mobility. You are not necessarily stuck in whatever group you were born in. And in some countries, it's a lot harder to move up in social status or economic status than it is in the United States. And there definitely are a lot of debates about how much mobility we have, how easy it is to get into certain areas versus not. So that's kind of a normative discussion. We maybe can have that discussion later. Stop by my office hours, talk to some classmates. What do you think? Is it easy to get to this top income? Do you feel like you're going to be able to earn twice as much, 3 times as much as your parents? Are you going to be able to earn $200,000, $500,000 a year? Or do you think you're more likely to be in $30,000, $50,000 a year? Okay, so just think about some of those things and then do some research. So the Lorenz curve, this is where the Gini coefficient comes from. It takes the data from the Lorenz curve. This is a graph. It was made by a guy named Lorenz. That's why we call it that. And it is graphing inequality. And you see this straight line here going through the middle. It's red on this graph. It's black on this other one. But this straight line represents equal income distribution, where the top 20% have the same amount of income as the bottom 20%. So that red line represents income equality. The other lines, these curved lines that we see below or to the right of that box in the bottom half, that shows where countries actually are. And so you could see when we look at the bottom 20%, they maybe have 5% of the total income. Okay? And if they were on this line here, 20% of the households would have 20% of the income. And then as we get over this way, right, once we get to the top, it's going to be 100% and 100%. So we always go from 0 to 100. And the flatter that curve is over here on the bottom part, right, the less equal the economy is. Right? So the farther away we're getting from that line, the more unequal we are. It is used for graphically representing inequality and comparing income inequality before or after policies or between different countries. Both of these are in your book, chapter 19 of your Libra textbook. That's that first one. This graph is looking at changes in equality before and after taxes and benefits. So this is looking at taxing and redistribution. And the yellow line is just the income that people are earning. And the green line is how inequality is changed after taxes and redistribution. And so what we see is that taxes and redistribution do make economies more equal. Not always. Sometimes it changes incentives, and we're going to see, we won't get into too many of those problems now. I really want to talk about it though, so come talk to me during office hours. Some policies are more effective than others. Some policies change work incentives, they change other things that may make it so that they're not super effective or impactful. But the idea is that we want to use some kind of policies to make naturally occurring inequality less unequal. And then let's talk about poverty. So poverty is not the same thing as inequality. Poverty means you're living below some basic level of needs. And there's different ways of defining poverty. So there's absolute poverty, which is living below some level that meets a basic need. So this would just be like pure existing. You have some amount of need for calories and a little bit of clothing and shelter. Extreme poverty is living on less than $1.90 per day. Moderate poverty is living on less than $3.10 per day. And now this has been adjusted for purchasing power parity. So just imagine wherever you live right now, trying to live on $2 a day. These numbers get updated as we see certain changes in the economy. So sometimes it goes up a little bit. But generally, it's a really small amount. There is some good news, though, in the world of poverty. We do see that the global numbers are getting better. And we have line up here is representing the population, and this little line dividing the two dark blue color and the light blue color, this is showing the number of people in absolute poverty. So even though the population is increasing, population's going up significantly, the number of people who live in absolute poverty is going down. So not just percentage, right? It looks like over here, it's about 2 billion out of 5. So it used to be 40% of the world lived below this line. And now we're getting up to 8 billion, and we only have about 1 billion or less than 1 billion in poverty. So now, what is that, 12%? 12.5% of people live in absolute poverty. And this is just looking at the data from 1981 through 2016. This is a huge decrease in absolute poverty. That's great, right? It means that we're fixing outcomes. Health outcomes are getting better. People have access to clean water and food and resources. Maybe we have increases in productivity that give people access to more money. You can check out World Bank. This is a great source if you want more information about this. There's lots of data and statistics and articles you can read. Relative poverty is income compared to some average or some kind of benchmark. So when we talk about poverty in the United States, we're not talking about absolute poverty. We're not talking about living less than $2 or $3 a day. We're looking at some benchmark, some amount that our country has decided is the level of poverty. So in the United States, if you're, low income, below the poverty line, that's looking at relative poverty. And that's taking into account the income that's earned in our country, average income, top income, what it costs to live in the United States. So for instance, in a lot of places in the US, it's illegal to live in a house that does not have electricity and running water. So you can't just be like, well, I don't want to pay my electric bill. I'm going to shut the electricity off. I'm going to shut the water off. Your house might get shut down. Okay, here's a chart over here. This is looking at levels in 2015. Obviously, it has adjusted since then, so definitely look up some newer numbers. But the sort of range stays similar. If you live in the United States and you live by yourself, so one person household, at least in 2015, it was $11,770. If you made less than that, you were considered below the poverty line. If you had a household family of 4, it would be $24,250. Now, some of these numbers have gone up, right? So maybe I should just adjust this. I'll change it for the slides so you'll see the 2025 numbers. Because 2025 it's gone up to 15,650. So basically these have just kind of all shifted one. Okay. I don't know about you, but 15,000 is really just not enough for me to live on per year. If you think about rent and food and transportation and all these things, maybe it's enough to exist and survive, but it's not a lot. If we're looking global level, okay, so if we want, income equality in the global, so everybody in the entire world is making the same amount of money, same income per person. Currently, it's about $15,000 per person. And in the US, the poverty line for one person is about $15,000. So to be equal in the world, you're considered poor in the United States. Okay, so here's my tip. If you're going to be poor in the United States, because you're still doing better than a lot of places in the world. There's a difference between short-term and long-term poverty. So half of the people who fall into that poor category are there for less than 1 year. And 3/4 of them are there for less than 4 years. So maybe you're earning $15,000 a year right now. But in 3 years, you're going to graduate, get a job, you're going to be making $65,000. Right? You're not in that poverty group anymore. So what we see is a lot of this is short-term or temporary poverty in the United States. We do have welfare programs and job development, education. We have a bunch of stuff that does help people get out of poverty. That other 25% is considered longer-term poverty. So that last 25% of people, they are stuck there for a lot longer term. And typically, it's most likely because of some sort of employment problem. So we're talking about discouraged workers or lack of relevant skills, just structural unemployment, disabilities, something that's preventing people from having income mobility and being able to move up. And oftentimes, these people are on long term government assistance because they don't have the ability to work or earn income outside of those government programs. And so, okay, sometimes what we want to do, we want to fix poverty, we want to fix inequality, and the government says, all right, great idea. Let's do some kind of redistribution. And typically, this is through taxes. So they're going to take money from wealthier groups or higher income groups. And then they're going to provide services or cash to lower income groups. This is not the only way to fix poverty or inequality, but it is a very common method that many countries use. So redistribution can be in the form of cash aid or in-kind goods. So cash aid might be like a EBT card. They give you a debit card or some actual cash that you can spend on stuff. In-kind goods would be like, here's an apartment you can live in. Here's a bag of food. They're just giving you stuff. Typically in the United States, it's for things like food, housing, medical, education, cash to cover basic daily necessities. And taxes are often one of our main forms of redistribution. So the government collects money from the higher groups and gives it out to the poorer groups. It is not the only way the government can initiate debt. They can generate revenue other ways, but in the United States, taxes are our main form. The Earned Income Tax Credit is a way of trying to encourage work. So we want to keep people working so their skills are up to date, so they don't fall into long-term unemployment. And if they're low income, they're not earning enough, this is a way of giving them a tax credit that bumps up their income so they're maybe not in those poverty or low income groups. This is one of the biggest programs in the United States. I wrote a paper on this for my master's degree. It has seemed to be very beneficial, but there are still a lot of limitations. Countries also sometimes use things called a negative income tax. This would actually give them a flat rate credit if their income is low enough. So we're just going to send you money if you don't make enough money. Okay, so tax credit. There's credits, there's deductions, there's all sorts of tax things. Typically, a credit is money that's given back to you, even if you didn't pay anything. So maybe like earned income tax credit, maybe I owed $300 in federal taxes, but my EITC credit is $2,000. So what this means is that even though I only owed $300, the government is going to send me $1,700. If it was a tax deduction, then it would just reduce what I owed to zero. Okay, so credits, if it's a refundable credit, some are non-refundable, but if it's a refundable credit, it means they will give you money back even beyond the total you owed from taxes. Sometimes governments try to use minimum wages as a way of redistribution. There is a lot of debate about whether this is effective or not. Typically, most sources say it's not really helpful because we talked about how it raises like exempt employee wages, it raises all sorts of wages, it causes inflation. And so while it may be something that can be helpful sort of as a baseline, it's not going to typically do a whole lot if you raise a minimum wage more than what it's at. The government also will do things like public employment. So they will have government-sponsored jobs for the poor. They will have programs where they give companies tax credits or some kind of incentive to hire people who have been unemployed for a long period of time. So there's all just sorts of different ways of trying to get people in those poor or non-working groups into the working sector. So what are some problems with redistribution? Does it actually reduce poverty and income inequality? Maybe. It depends. I don't know. So one of the problems in the United States is that a lot of our programs are social safety net programs, which means they're trying to help people who've fallen below a certain income level. So let's see, here's our poverty level of $15,000 per person, and now they fell below the line. Uh-oh. So the government's going to sort of scoop them up with their safety net and then move them up here. So now instead of 15,000, they're going to be at 16,000. Hooray, they're not poor anymore. Okay, so the problem with this is it doesn't really lift people very far above that poverty line. You could be $1 over, $10 over, $1,000 over, and now you're not considered poor anymore. And you may not even qualify for some of those benefits, government benefits before, which oftentimes incentivizes people to stay sort of below that poverty line because they might actually lose a lot of income by, or like benefits and in cash, in kind goods by going up. Sometimes redistribution exacerbates poverty and inequality due to work incentives, increasing income, reducing benefits, and really it just doesn't address the underlying issues. So we have issues with discrimination, we have issues with certain laws and regulations benefiting certain groups or certain types of factor markets. It doesn't really deal with the fact that we have structural unemployment or disabilities or other things. And so we see that in some markets, redistribution actually can make inequality worse. This is possibly one of the reasons, like the work disincentives and losing benefits from getting more money. This sort of keeps the bottom 20% stuck. And it may be temporary, but it's just going to be hard for them to get out and have significant growth. We also have a lot of issues with discrimination. In labor markets, this is talking about hiring or wages being based on age, sex, gender, ethnicity, race, other characteristics of identity that do not impact job duties. Okay, so if it doesn't matter, if it's not part of the task, I don't know. I mean, sometimes these things can be part of the job, but typically they're just not. And workplace discrimination is illegal. And it could be based on employer or customer preferences. We talked about that, I think, in the last video. Employers may not like a particular race or gender, or the customers may not like a particular race or gender, and that can impact those things. But workplace discrimination is illegal. Sometimes we have direct discrimination. This occurs when individuals are explicitly treated unfairly based on specific characteristics. So maybe a company only hires male applicants to be surgeons, and they only hire female applicants to be nurses. Despite the fact that we have both men and women applying for those jobs, we could see that kind of direct discrimination. There's also indirect discrimination, which can, maybe there's a neutral policy where they say, okay, we're going to post the job description and we're going to list all the requirements. You have to have this education, this training, this skills, blah, blah, blah. And it could be that there's like an extensive work experience requirement that might disadvantage younger applicants. Or they may be requiring a high level of education or like a very specific degree that's not actually necessary to do whatever work is being done. And it's a way of weeding out applicants or, trying to discriminate against certain groups over another. Now, this doesn't mean that any time you see something that says you must have 5+ years of experience, that it's discriminating against age. It could be that you actually do have to have experience to effectively do that job. Oftentimes, if you're applying for a management role or a senior position, they want to make sure that you've had enough time working in other positions, other departments, other things that you're able to handle the full range of tasks. But if it was just, an entry-level job, so entry-level cashier, they just need somebody to ring things up, and they're like, you need 5 years of experience. This could potentially be a way of discriminating. Sometimes we have institutional discrimination. It may start earlier. It could be that based on other things, like let's talk about school. So let's say here's our city, and we have 3 schools, 1, 2, and 3. And in the United States, school earnings are often directly related to property taxes and other things. And so let's say school number 1 is in a wealthier part of town, okay, and they actually have more money for education. So they're going to have $3, and school number 2 and school number 3 only get $1 for education. So they're all getting the same public school education, but the wealthier group is getting a lot more. Oftentimes in cities like this, we do see issues with race and ethnicity where you may have one race or more minorities maybe over here. So you have a lot more minorities in District 2. So they don't have access to extracurriculars and tutoring and all these other services that this school gets. So now you're applying for college, and the people in this category have this long list of stuff they've done. And the minority category, they're like, well, I just, I got my degree, I took my classes. And so maybe you get denied for college, and more of the people in this group get accepted. Or because you didn't have access to as much tutoring or resources, and you had to work the whole time while going to school just to get your degree, maybe your SAT scores or whatever, test they're looking at, your scores are lower. And so some of these disadvantages can lead to certain types of institutional discrimination. So people might want to argue like, oh, well, the job says, you need a college degree. Well, it may be unfair if we're not making sure that we have equal opportunities and beyond that, equal outcomes starting at a really young age. So people might want to argue like, I'm not discriminating. My job requires a degree, and only these 2 people had degrees, and these 3 people didn't have degrees. So it doesn't matter that the people with degrees were white and the people without degrees were black. I'm not discriminating based on race. I'm just saying you need a degree. It's a requirement. And the thing is, it may be that this particular company is not discriminating, but the discrimination started way back in, kindergarten, when the access to resources for families and students was not the same, leading to some of these discrepancies. And it also could be that the company is discriminating if they know that, white people are more likely to have a certain type of degree. They may list that degree as a requirement as a way of unnecessarily or purposely discriminating against a particular minority. There's actually a really high cost of discrimination. So from 1990 to 2019, some of the estimates say that the U.S. economy lost $70 trillion, almost $71 trillion, due to racial and gender disparities in labor market outcomes. So some of this is in income, benefits, wages. Some of this has to do with like less innovation. If we're not paying people enough, we're not incentivizing them enough, we're actually missing out on quite a lot of stuff. There are unemployment disparities. So we've seen that for nearly 70 years, the Black unemployment rate has remained twice as high of white workers, regardless of education, economic conditions, or age. So there's definitely discrimination or some serious problem going on in that market, because once you account for all of these other factors, we should not see this happening. In December 2021, the unemployment rate was 3.2% if people were white, 3.8% for AAPI, 4.9% Hispanic, and 7.1% for Black. So you see 3.2 all the way up to 7.1. That's a huge problem. When we look at underemployment, so this is in jobs that are paying less money or they're part-time and people want to work full-time, they're not meeting those income needs. 40% of college-educated Black workers were in jobs that didn't require a degree versus 31% of their white peers. So we see that these are people who have all gone to college, they all have their degree, and 40% of the Black workers were in a job that didn't require that degree. 31% of their white peers were also in similar jobs. So more people with college degrees are being negatively impacted if they're Black compared to white. When we look at executive access, only 3% of CEOs are African American, mostly in lower paid public and nonprofit sectors. There's issues with professional representation. Black and Hispanic workers remain underrepresented in high-paying professional roles. So we see huge discrepancies in gender and race. We also see that wage inequality is growing with education. So it's not just a difference in education. It's not just, oh, well, the white people went to college and the African Americans didn't. we see that those wage gaps actually get worse at higher education levels. So when we look, this is comparing to, I forgot what I was going to say. Okay, so it dropped from 86.4% to 77.5%. If people who are Hispanic with a bachelor's degree, it went from 86% to 84%. If you have an advanced degree, so like a master's or a PhD, it went from 89% down to 82%. And in the Hispanic group, having an advanced degree dropped you from 94% to 90%. So we're seeing that the getting a degree is actually making some of those issues worse, right? We're comparing to, I think this is comparing to their white peers at the same level of education. So we can see like getting education is dropping that. Now, having an advanced degree is better, so let's get an advanced degree, but we still shouldn't be seeing those discrepancies. If someone has a PhD in economics, they should be earning the same amount, whether or not they're Hispanic or African American or white or Asian or anything else, right? So we do see that there are high costs of discrimination. It is a problem. It is leading to economic losses overall because we are missing out on some of those insights and innovations and things that incentivize people to produce stuff when we're not paying enough. And when we see these continued gaps in unemployment and wages, it does lead to some kind of conclusion about discrimination, either at the company level or somewhere in the system. All right, there's a lot more we could talk about and say about this, so definitely do some more reading. This is really important. Take some classes on economics of discrimination and come talk to me. All right, have a great day.